You'll sleep in the guest room tonight until you learn to respect me. That's what my husband told me after 40 years of marriage. 40 years of making his coffee the way his mother taught me. 40 years of pressing his collars because the dry cleaner never gets them right. 40 years of becoming invisible in my own home. I didn't argue. I smiled. I said, "All right, John." The next morning, when he walked into the kitchen expecting contrition, he found fresh coffee, warm biscuits, and my wedding ring sitting in the center of his plate like a period at the end of a sentence. Before we begin, click subscribe, like this video and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now let's get to the story. The night before, the Fenster home glowed with the kind of comfort only decades can build. Mahogany furniture polished to a mirror shine lined the hallway, pieces inherited from John's parents, each one carrying the weight of tradition and expectation. Warm lamplight spilled from brass fixtures I'd cleaned that morning, casting golden shadows across cream-colored walls. Framed photographs marched up the staircase like a timeline of our lives, our wedding day beneath the oak tree in my parents' backyard, the births of our 3 children, anniversary trips to Cape Cod and Napa Valley, grandchildren blowing out birthday candles. To anyone looking in from the outside, John and I were the picture of longevity. A legacy marriage. The kind that gets toasted at family gatherings and held up as proof that love can last. But behind every framed smile was a silence that had been growing louder with each passing year. John was once the kind of man who made me laugh until I cried. The kind who'd spin me around the kitchen while dinner simmered on the stove, who'd leave sticky notes on the bathroom mirror that said "You're beautiful and I'm the luckiest man alive." Over the years, the laughter turned into lectures. The partnership turned into performance. He liked to control the way some men like whiskey, sharp, steady, and just enough to keep the world spinning his way. That evening, I'd prepared his favorite meal, pot roast with fingerling potatoes, roasted carrots glazed with honey, fresh rolls from the bakery he liked downtown. I'd set the table with our wedding china, the pattern with the delicate gold rim that his mother had insisted we register for. 2 wine glasses. Cloth napkins folded into triangles. We sat across from each other at the dining room table, the familiar choreography of a marriage that had long since traded spontaneity for routine. John cut into his pot roast with surgical precision, the knife scraping against the plate in a rhythm I'd heard 10,000 times before. I took a sip of water, steadying myself for the question I'd been rehearsing all afternoon. "John," I said carefully, keeping my voice light and conversational, "I was reviewing our bank statements this week, and I noticed a large withdrawal from our savings account. $15,000. I don't remember us discussing it." His fork paused halfway to his mouth. The air in the room changed, thickened, like humidity before a storm. "What were you doing looking at the statements?" His tone was measured, controlled, but there was an edge beneath it. The kind that used to make me immediately backtrack and apologize. "I always review them," I said evenly. "I've been doing our bookkeeping for 35 years. He set down his fork with deliberate care. "Maybe it's time you stopped. I handle the finances now, Maria." "We've always handled them together," I said, feeling my heartbeat quicken in my chest. "Both our names are on the accounts. I'm not questioning your judgment, I just want to understand where the money went." That's when everything shattered. John slammed his fork down so hard the plate cracked clean down the middle with a sound like a gunshot. "Because I'm the one who earns it, Maria." His voice filled the dining room, bouncing off the walls I'd painted sage green 3 summers ago, the curtains I'd hemmed by hand, the life I'd built alongside him brick by invisible brick. "I worked 60-hour weeks for 40 years while you stayed home playing house. That money is mine to do with as I see fit, and I don't owe you an explanation for every damn decision I make." The words hit me like a physical blow. Playing house. As if raising 3 children hadn't been work. As if managing every detail of our home, the bills, the repairs, the endless appointments and obligations, hadn't been work. As if hosting every client dinner that helped build his career, organizing every holiday that held our family together, caring for his mother during her final battle with cancer, as if all of that had been some frivolous hobby I'd taken up to pass the time. I sat very still, the way you do when you're trying to keep yourself from breaking apart. I wasn't questioning your right to spend our money, I said quietly. I was asking where it went. Well, it's none of your damn business. He pushed back from the table, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. And frankly, I'm sick of this attitude you've had lately. The suspicion. The second-guessing. The complete lack of respect. Respect? The word escaped before I could stop it, sharper than I intended. I've spent 40 years respecting you, John. I'm asking one simple question about our joint account. He turned to face me fully, and what I saw in his eyes made my blood run cold. Not anger. Not even frustration. Contempt. The kind of look you give someone you've stopped seeing as an equal. Someone you've already decided doesn't matter. You'll sleep in the guest room tonight, he said, his voice low and final, each word dropped like a stone into still water, until you learn to respect me. The silence that followed pressed against my eardrums. I could have argued. Could have demanded the truth about the $15,000. Could have thrown the cracked plate at his head and screamed that I'd earned every penny in that account through 4 decades of invisible labor. But I didn't. Something shifted inside me in that moment, something fundamental and irreversible, like tectonic plates finally giving way after years of pressure. I stood up slowly, deliberately, and placed my napkin beside my plate with the same care I'd used to fold it an hour earlier. Then I looked him directly in the eye. All right, John, I said. And I smiled. Not the smile of a woman who'd been defeated. Not the smile of a woman begging for mercy or trying to de-escalate. It was the smile of a woman who'd just made a decision. John blinked, visibly thrown. His shoulders tensed. For half a second, uncertainty flickered across his face, as if he'd expected tears or apologies or rage, anything but this eerie calm. Then he recovered, straightening his spine, convinced he'd won. Good, he muttered. Maybe a night alone will give you some perspective. He walked out of the dining room without looking back, his footsteps heavy on the stairs as he climbed to our master bedroom, the room we'd shared for 40 years, the room that suddenly felt like foreign territory. I stood alone in the dining room, surrounded by the ruins of our dinner. The cracked plate. The congealing pot roast. The wine glasses we hadn't touched. And I smiled again. I climbed the stairs to the second floor and walked down the hallway to the guest room at the end, the room with the door that always stuck slightly, requiring a firm push to open. It was a lovely room, really. I'd decorated it myself 15 years ago when we'd first moved into this house, pale blue walls the color of a robin's egg, white crown molding, gauzy curtains that let in the eastern light. A queen-sized bed with a quilted coverlet I'd sewn by hand during one long winter when the children were grown and gone and I'd needed something to do with my hands. The room had history. My mother had spent her final 3 months here, too weak to climb stairs, surrounded by family photos and the scent of lavender sachets. After she passed, it became the room for visiting grandchildren, for friends who stayed too late at holiday parties, for the occasional argument that needed a night of cool-down space. Now it was my exile. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around, really looked, the way you do when you're seeing something for the first time or preparing to see it for the last. The antique sewing desk beneath the window, the one I'd refinished with my own hands, stripping away layers of old varnish to reveal the honey-colored wood beneath. The bookshelf lined with novels I'd been meaning to read but never had time for, their spines still crisp and uncracked. The closet that held my winter coats and the emerald dress I'd worn to our daughter's wedding, the dress John had said made me look like I was trying too hard. The digital clock on the nightstand blinked 8:52 p.m. in red numbers. Downstairs, I could hear the muffled sound of the television, John watching the evening news, probably pouring himself a scotch, settling into his recliner like a king on a throne, convinced he'd put me in my place. I sat in the silence and felt something inside me crack open. Not break. Open. For 40 years, I'd made myself small. Smoothed over his sharp edges. Made excuses for his moods, he's stressed, he's tired, he works so hard, this is just how marriage works after a while. I'd convinced myself that his control was protection, that his dismissiveness was just practicality, that things would get better once he retired, once the pressure eased, once. But sitting there in the guest room, bathed in the soft glow of the bedside lamp, I realized something that made my hands go cold and my breathing shallow. I had become a guest in my own life. I stood and walked to the window, pulling back the gauzy curtain. Outside, the streetlights cast long, geometric shadows across our manicured lawn. Our neighborhood, the one we'd moved to 30 years ago when John's consulting firm took off, looked peaceful and prosperous. Brick colonials with perfectly trimmed hedges. 2-car garages. The American dream rendered in real estate. Picture perfect. Just like our marriage was supposed to be. My reflection stared back at me from the darkened glass, a woman with silver-streaked hair styled in the soft waves John preferred, smooth brown skin that still glowed despite the passing years, eyes that had learned to hide too much. I'd kept myself together. Kept the house together. Kept the illusion together. But I was so tired. Tired of being invisible while standing directly in front of him. Tired of being dismissed as if 40 years of partnership could be erased with a single sentence. Tired of pretending that love without respect was enough. The woman in the window looked back at me, and for the first time in years, I let myself see her clearly. Not John's wife. Not the children's mother. Not the perfectly maintained accessory to someone else's life. Just Maria. And Maria was done. I turned away from the window and did something I hadn't done in decades. I made a vow to myself. Not out loud. Not dramatically. Just a quiet promise in the stillness of that blue room, witnessed by no one but the ticking clock and my own reflection. I will not raise my voice. I will not beg for scraps of dignity. I will not make a scene that he can use to paint me as hysterical or irrational. My revenge will be built in silence. Constructed with precision. Executed with grace. He wants me to learn respect? Fine. I'll teach him what it costs when you lose mine. I changed into my nightgown, the simple cotton one I'd bought for myself, not the silk negligee John had given me for Christmas that I'd never liked, and slipped beneath the covers. The sheets smelled like lavender from the sachets I kept in the linen closet. The pillow cradled my head. The room was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic on the highway and the sound of my own breathing, steady and calm. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the patterns in the plaster with my eyes, and let a plan begin to form in the dark corners of my mind. By the time the clock read 11:47 p.m., I knew exactly what I was going to do. The next morning, I woke at 5:45 a.m., the same time I'd been waking for 40 years, my internal clock more reliable than any alarm. Muscle memory carried me through the familiar choreography. I descended the stairs, stepping over the third step that creaked. Started the coffee pot, 2 scoops of the dark roast John preferred, half a teaspoon of cinnamon for his heart, 2 drops of vanilla extract. While it gurgled and hissed, I pulled out the ingredients for biscuits, flour, butter, buttermilk, a pinch of salt. The kitchen filled with warmth and the smell of home, the smell of every morning I'd created for someone else. But this morning was different. This morning, while my hands worked through the routine they knew by heart, my mind was somewhere else entirely. Planning. Calculating. Remembering every detail I'd need. The biscuits went into the oven at 6:20. The coffee finished brewing at 6:35. I set the table with the same precision I'd used for 4 decades, his favorite mug, the morning paper folded beside his plate, honey butter in the small ceramic dish. And then I did something I'd never done before. I walked upstairs to our master bedroom, the room I'd been banished from the night before, and opened my jewelry box on the dresser. My wedding ring sat in its velvet slot, the diamond catching the early morning light. I'd worn that ring for 40 years. 40 years of washing dishes and changing diapers and building a life. The band had worn thin in places from all those years of work, the diamond slightly loose in its setting. I picked it up and held it in my palm, feeling its weight. Then I walked back downstairs and placed it in the center of John's plate, right where his napkin should have been. The diamond threw tiny rainbows across the white tablecloth. John came down at 7:15, showered and dressed in the navy suit he wore to important meetings, his reading glasses perched on his nose, phone already in his hand as he scrolled through morning emails. He walked into the kitchen expecting the usual, coffee at the exact temperature he preferred, breakfast waiting, his wife meek and apologetic after a night of exile and reflection. What he found instead stopped him cold in the doorway. The table was set perfectly. Coffee steaming. Fresh biscuits golden and warm. And in the center of his plate, catching the morning sun like an accusation, sat my wedding ring. Maria? His voice cracked on my name, all the authority from the night before suddenly gone. I stood at the sink with my back to him, calmly washing the mixing bowl I'd used for the biscuits, my hands moving through soapy water with practiced ease. Good morning, John, I said pleasantly, as if this were any other Thursday. I hope you slept well. What is this? He stepped closer to the table, staring at the ring as if it might be a trick of the light. Why is your ring on my plate? I rinsed the bowl, set it in the drying rack, and dried my hands on the dish towel, the one embroidered with sunflowers that my daughter had given me for Mother's Day. Only then did I turn to face him. I slept very well in the guest room, I said, my tone warm and conversational. In fact, I've been thinking, and I've decided to make it a permanent arrangement. His face went pale. What are you talking about? I'm talking about respect, John. I walked past him to the table, picked up my own coffee mug, the one I'd poured for myself, not him, and took a slow, deliberate sip. You said I needed to learn it. So I spent the night thinking about what respect actually means. Maria, you're being ridiculous. This is about one argument. No. My voice was calm, but there was steel running through it like rebar through concrete. This is about $15,000 taken from our joint account without a word to me. This is about being told I've spent 40 years playing house, as if my life's work means nothing. This is about being banished to the guest room like a disobedient child who needs to be taught a lesson. I set down my mug and met his eyes directly. You told me to sleep in the guest room until I learned to respect you. Well, I learned something last night, John. I learned that I've been respecting a man who stopped respecting me a very long time ago. The color drained from his face entirely, then rushed back in a flood of red. You can't be serious. You're going to throw away 40 years over one bad night? Over money? I smiled then, the same smile from the night before, the one that had unsettled him. I'm not throwing anything away. You did that when you opened a new account with someone named Lydia Carr and transferred $15,000 into it without telling your wife. He froze. Actually froze, his entire body going rigid as if I'd struck him. How did you? I've always done the bookkeeping, remember? I picked up my purse from the counter, already packed with my wallet, my phone, and a folder of documents I'd pulled from the filing cabinet at 6 a.m. I may not have earned the paychecks, but I know every account number, every password, every transaction. Including the ones you thought I wouldn't notice because you assumed I was too stupid or too complacent to look. John's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who just discovered the ground beneath his feet wasn't solid after all. I walked toward the front door, my steps steady and sure. Where are you going? His voice finally returned, thin and desperate. Maria, wait, we need to talk about this. I paused with my hand on the doorknob and looked back at him one last time. He stood in the kitchen doorway, his expensive suit suddenly looking too big for him, his phone still clutched uselessly in his hand, his breakfast growing cold on the table beside my wedding ring. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. I'm going to see my nephew Anthony, I said. He's a financial consultant who specializes in estate planning and asset protection. I think it's time I protected what's mine. You can't just leave. Actually, I can. You gave me permission last night when you told me where I'd be sleeping. I'm just following your instructions. I opened the door. Cool morning air rushed in, carrying the scent of cut grass and possibility. The sun was rising over the oak trees lining our street, painting the sky in shades of coral and gold. Maria, please. I stepped over the threshold, my purse on my shoulder, my head held high. You told me to sleep in the guest room, John, I said quietly. You just never thought I'd wake up there. I closed the door softly behind me, no slam, no drama, and walked to my car. As I pulled out of the driveway, I glanced in the rearview mirror. John stood in the doorway of our house, backlit by the warm light from inside, watching me drive away. For the first time in 40 years, I didn't look back. The church office sat at the end of a quiet street lined with mature maples, their leaves just beginning to turn copper and gold in the early October air. St. Augustine's had been part of our family for 3 generations. My parents were married here, my children were baptized here, my mother's funeral service was held in the sanctuary with its soaring wooden beams and stained glass windows that threw rainbows across the pews. Now I was here for a different kind of ceremony. A different kind of ending. Anthony's office was in the annex building behind the main church, a modest brick structure that housed the administrative offices and community meeting rooms. His name was printed on a brass plate beside the door, Anthony Rivera, financial consultant and estate planning. My sister's son. The boy I'd helped raise after she died when he was 12. The man who'd grown into someone solid and trustworthy, someone who kept his word and protected the people he loved. I knocked twice and pushed open the door. Aunt Maria. Anthony looked up from his desk, surprise and concern flickering across his face as he stood. He was 42 now, with his mother's warm brown eyes and his father's steady presence. I wasn't expecting you this morning. Is everything okay? I closed the door behind me and locked it, a small gesture, but it made the space feel safer somehow. More contained. I hope I'm not interrupting, I said, keeping my voice light and casual despite the folder clutched in my hands. I know I should have called first, but I was in the neighborhood and thought maybe you could help me review some estate paperwork. John's been talking about updating our wills, and I wanted to understand our assets before we meet with the lawyers. It was a reasonable excuse. Natural. The kind of thing a responsible wife would do. Anthony gestured to the chair across from his desk. Of course. I always have time for you. He studied my face more carefully as I sat down. Are you sure everything's all right? You look tired? I supplied with a small smile. I didn't sleep well last night. I was going to say, determined, he said quietly. Smart boy. He'd always been perceptive. I set the folder on his desk and opened it, revealing the documents I'd printed that morning while John was still asleep. Bank statements going back 6 months, investment account summaries, property deeds, insurance policies. I just want to make sure I understand what we have, I said. Where everything is. What's in whose name? You know how these things can get complicated after so many years. Anthony pulled the folder closer and began scanning the first few pages, his professional mask sliding into place. But I could see the subtle shifts in his expression, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the way his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He reached for a legal pad and began making notes, his pen moving quickly across the page. After several minutes of silence broken only by the rustle of papers and the scratch of pen on paper, he looked up at me. Aunt Maria, he said carefully, some of these accounts, they're not structured the way I would expect for a married couple doing estate planning together. What do you mean? He turned one of the statements toward me and pointed to the account holder line. This savings account, the one with the substantial balance, it's only in Uncle John's name. Not joint. But we opened that account together, I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. 30 years ago, when he started the consulting firm. We were both supposed to be on it. Well, at some point, the ownership structure changed. Anthony flipped to another page. Same with this investment account. And this one. He paused, his finger hovering over a highlighted section. And there are transfers here I don't understand. Large ones. Moving money out of the joint accounts and into. He stopped, his expression darkening. Into what? I asked, even though part of me already knew the answer. Anthony pulled out another document, one I hadn't included in my folder. He must have pulled it from his own system, cross-referencing the account numbers I'd given him. Into a new account opened 6 months ago, he said quietly. A joint account with someone named Lydia Carr. The name hung in the air between us like smoke. Lydia Carr. I'd known, of course. I'd seen the transfers when I reviewed the statements the day before. I'd seen her name typed in neat letters beside John's on the account summary. But hearing Anthony say it out loud, hearing it confirmed by someone else, made real by a witness, that was different. That made it true. How much? I asked, my voice steady despite the ice spreading through my chest. Anthony hesitated, then turned his laptop screen toward me. 15,000 in the initial transfer. Then smaller amounts every few weeks after that. 2,000. 3,000. The most recent was 5 days ago, another 2,000. I studied the screen, the numbers blurring slightly as my eyes tried to focus. $26,000 total. Nearly half of our liquid savings, moved quietly over the course of 6 months into an account I wasn't supposed to know about. What's her connection to Uncle John? Anthony asked. Is she an employee? A business partner? I laughed, a short, bitter sound that surprised us both. No, I said. She's our neighbor's niece. The Harrisons, 3 houses down. Lydia came to stay with them last spring. She's 28 years old and works in marketing or consulting or something like that. She brought us casseroles after John had his minor fall in June. It had been early June, one of those perfect late spring days when the air smells like cut grass and possibility. I'd been in the garden deadheading roses when I heard the commotion from the Harrisons' driveway. A cherry-red BMW pulled up, music thumping from the speakers, and out stepped a young woman who moved like she owned the world. Long dark hair, expensive sunglasses, a laugh that carried across 3 lawns. That's our niece Lydia, Patricia Harrison had told me later over iced tea on her patio. She's staying with us for a few months while she gets on her feet. Just got out of a bad relationship, poor thing. Brilliant girl though, works in brand consulting. You and John should meet her sometime. She's always looking to network. I'd smiled politely and said that would be lovely, not knowing I was inviting a viper into my garden. 2 weeks later, John had taken a tumble off a ladder while trying to clean the gutters, against my repeated suggestions that we hire someone to do it. He'd twisted his ankle, nothing serious, but he'd milked the injury for maximum sympathy. That evening, Lydia had appeared at our door carrying a casserole dish wrapped in a cheerful red checkered towel. Mr. Harrison told me about your husband's fall, she'd said, her smile warm and concerned. I made my famous chicken tetrazzini. It's the least I could do for neighbors. She'd insisted on coming inside to make sure it gets into the oven at the right temperature, and had somehow ended up staying for dinner, charming John with questions about his consulting work, laughing at his stories about difficult clients, calling him so insightful and absolutely brilliant. I'd stood in the kitchen washing dishes while they talked, watching through the doorway as my husband leaned forward in his chair, animated in a way I hadn't seen him in years. She's sharp, John had said after she left. Really sharp. Reminds me of myself at that age, hungry, ambitious, not afraid to ask the hard questions. I should have known then. Over the next few weeks, Lydia became a regular presence. She'd drop by to check on John's ankle, always bringing something, fresh bread from the farmer's market, articles she thought he'd find interesting, invitations to neighborhood events. You should come to the Harrisons' barbecue on Saturday, she'd say, touching John's arm with casual familiarity. I'd love to pick your brain about market positioning. John started dressing better on weekends. Started wearing cologne to run errands. Started talking about consulting opportunities with Lydia's connections. One afternoon in August, I'd come home early from a doctor's appointment to find them sitting on our back patio, papers spread across the table, Lydia leaning close to point at something on her laptop screen. Maria. John had said, startled. You're home early. My appointment was cancelled, I'd said, looking between them. What are you two working on? Just reviewing some market analysis, Lydia had said smoothly, closing her laptop with a soft click. Your husband is so generous with his expertise. She'd gathered her things and left shortly after, but not before giving John a squeeze on the shoulder and saying, "Same time Thursday?" I'd asked John about it that night. "It's nothing," he'd said, not looking up from his phone. "Just mentoring. The girl has potential. I'm helping her develop some business proposals." "For what?" "For her career, Maria." Not everything is suspicious. But it was. I'd known it then, in the way you know a storm is coming before the first drops fall. She brought him casseroles, I repeated to Anthony, my voice hollow. Fussed over him like he was some kind of hero for falling off a ladder. And I let her into our home. Anthony's expression was grim. "Aunt Maria, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Do you think Uncle John is having an affair?" The word hung between us, ugly and undeniable. "I don't know," I said quietly. "Maybe. Probably. Does it matter?" "It matters for how we proceed," Anthony said. "If there's infidelity involved, that changes things legally. But more importantly," he reached across the desk and took my hand. "It matters because you deserve to know the truth." I looked down at our clasped hands, his young and strong, mine lined with age but still steady. "I think," I said slowly, choosing each word with care, "that whether or not he's sleeping with her is almost beside the point. He's chosen her over me. He's given her access to our money, our future, our security. He's made her a partner in a way he stopped seeing me as a partner years ago." "That's financial infidelity at minimum," Anthony said. "And it's grounds for divorce," I finished. "I know." The words sat between us like a stone. Anthony squeezed my hand. "Is that what you want?" "I want," I said, "to know exactly how deep this goes. I want to know every account, every transfer, every lie. And then I want to decide what to do with that information." He nodded and pulled his laptop closer. "Then let's dig deeper." For the next hour, Anthony worked with the focused intensity of a surgeon, pulling records, cross-referencing accounts, tracking the digital paper trail that John had left behind. I sat across from him, watching the story unfold in spreadsheets and statements. The joint account with Lydia had been opened on April 15th, tax day, of all the ironic dates. The initial deposit was $15,000, transferred from our savings account under the memo line, investment opportunity. After that, the deposits became more frequent. Smaller amounts, harder to notice if you weren't looking carefully. $2,000 here, $3,000 there, pulled from accounts labeled home maintenance and business expenses and emergency fund. But it wasn't just the money. Anthony found something else, a credit card I'd never seen before, opened in John's name only, with statements sent to a P.O. box I didn't know we had. The charges told their own story. Restaurants I'd never been to. Weekend trips to wine country. Hotel rooms in the city. A jewelry purchase from Tiffany's for $3,000, dated 2 weeks before our 40th anniversary, when John had given me a card and taken me to dinner at the same restaurant we'd been going to for 20 years. "He took her to Ventana," Anthony said quietly, pointing to a charge on the statement. "The resort in Big Sur." That's not a business trip." "No. It wasn't." I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest, not the hot, burning rage I'd expected, but something colder. Sharper. More dangerous. The kind of anger that doesn't explode. The kind that calculates. After 40 years, I said, more to myself than to Anthony, I knew every tone of his lies. Anthony looked up. "What?" I met his eyes. The way his voice changes when he's hiding something. The way he won't quite meet my eyes when he's telling a partial truth. The little pause before he answers a question he wasn't expecting. I've known him for 4 decades. I know his tells better than I know my own. "So you suspected?" "I knew," I corrected. "I just didn't have the evidence. That's what I need now. Not suspicion. Not intuition. Evidence." Anthony leaned back in his chair, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You're planning something." It wasn't a question. "I'm planning," I said carefully, "to protect myself. To protect what I've earned. To make sure that when this is over, I'm not the one left with nothing." "What do you need from me?" I took a breath. "Everything you can find. Every account, every transfer, every document. I need to know exactly what we have and where it is. I need to know what's legally mine and what he's tried to hide. And I need to know," I paused, the words catching in my throat. "I need to know if there's more I haven't found yet." Anthony nodded slowly. "I can do that. But Aunt Maria, this is going to take time. We're talking about forensic accounting, subpoenas, potentially hiring a private investigator." "How long?" "A few weeks, maybe a month, to get a complete picture." "Then we have a month," I said. "Because John can't know what we're doing. If he suspects I'm building a case, he'll move everything. Hide it better. Make it disappear." "So what are you going to do in the meantime?" I stood, gathering the papers back into my folder with calm, methodical movements. "I'm going to go home," I said. "I'm going to make his dinner. I'm going to smile and nod and play the role of the chastened wife who learned her lesson after a night in the guest room. And then?" I looked at Anthony, and I let him see the steel beneath the silk. "And then," I said quietly, "I'm going to collect my evidence, piece by piece, until I have everything I need to take apart the life he built on my back." The October sun was higher now, warming the church parking lot and making the fallen leaves glow like copper pennies scattered across the pavement. I walked slowly to my car, my purse on one shoulder, the folder clutched against my chest like armor. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. 7 missed calls from John. 12 text messages. "Where are you?" "Maria, this is ridiculous. We need to talk. You can't just leave like this. I'm worried about you. Please come home. Maria, I'm sorry about last night. Let's talk." I read through them all with clinical detachment, then slid the phone back into my pocket without responding. Let him worry. Let him wonder. Let him think I was falling apart, melting down, making emotional decisions I'd regret. Let him underestimate me one more time. I climbed into my car and sat behind the wheel, not starting the engine right away. Instead, I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me had careful hair and tired eyes and 40 years of invisible labor etched into the lines around her mouth. But there was something else there too, something new. Purpose. After 40 years, I whispered to my reflection, I knew every tone of his lies. I just needed the evidence. And now I was going to get it. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, pointing my car toward home. Toward the guest room that had become my sanctuary. Toward the husband who thought he'd won. Toward the quiet, methodical work of taking back everything that was mine. The war had begun. And this time, I was fighting on my own terms. 3 weeks passed like a carefully choreographed dance. I returned home that first day from Anthony's office and slipped back into my role with practiced ease. Made John's coffee. Pressed his shirts. Smiled when he apologized for overreacting about the money, though notably, he never actually explained where it went. Let's just move past this, he'd said, kissing my forehead like I was a child who'd misbehaved and been forgiven. We're too old for drama. I nodded and said nothing. Meanwhile, Anthony worked in the shadows, pulling records, tracking transfers, building the case I'd need. And I played the perfect wife, all while collecting my own evidence, receipts tucked away, statements photographed, passwords quietly changed on accounts John had forgotten I had access to. By the time John's 65th birthday arrived, I had 3 weeks of documentation and a performance ready to give. Are you sure we need to do something this elaborate? John asked the morning of his birthday, watching me arrange white lilies in a crystal vase. We could have just gone out to dinner. Nonsense, I said, adjusting a stem with careful precision. 65 is a milestone. The children want to celebrate with you. Layla's been asking for weeks when she'd get to see Grandpa. His expression softened at the mention of our granddaughter. Well, when you put it that way. I'd spent the day preparing his favorite meal, prime rib with horseradish cream, roasted fingerling potatoes with rosemary, Brussels sprouts caramelized with balsamic. The dining room table gleamed with the good china, the silver candlesticks polished to a mirror shine. Our 3 children arrived promptly at 6, Marcus and his wife Jennifer, Claire with her husband Tom, and our youngest, David, who'd driven up from Philadelphia with his 7-year-old daughter Layla. Grandma. Layla rushed through the door and into my arms, all wild curls and missing front teeth. I made Grandpa a card. He's going to love it, sweetheart, I said, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. The family gathered in the living room, conversation flowing easily, Marcus talking about his promotion, Claire showing off photos from her recent vacation, David trying to convince John that cryptocurrency was the future. Everything was warm and normal and perfect. Until the doorbell rang at 6:30. I was in the kitchen basting the prime rib when I heard John's voice at the door, followed by a high, musical laugh I'd come to recognize. Johnny. I hope I'm not intruding. My hand tightened on the basting brush. I walked to the dining room doorway and there she was, Lydia Carr, standing in my entryway in a black cocktail dress that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, holding an expensive bottle of wine and wearing the kind of smile that said she belonged here. Lydia, John said, and I could hear the note of surprise in his voice, but not displeasure. Never displeasure. I didn't know you were coming. The Harrisons mentioned it was your birthday, she said, stepping closer and touching his arm with practiced familiarity. I couldn't let it pass without stopping by. I brought your favorite, that Napa cab you loved from the tasting. What tasting? Our children had gone quiet in the living room, watching this exchange with varying degrees of confusion. They'd never met Lydia before. I stepped forward, my hostess smiled firmly in place. Lydia, what a surprise. We weren't expecting additional guests, but you're welcome to stay for dessert. Oh, I wouldn't want to impose on family time, she said, but she was already walking past me toward the living room, John following like a satellite caught in her orbit. I'll just stay for a quick drink to toast the birthday boy. The birthday boy. He was 65 years old. I caught Claire's eye across the room. My daughter raised one perfectly shaped eyebrow in a silent question. Who is this? I gave her the barest shake of my head. Later. Somehow, Lydia ended up staying for dinner. Oh, I couldn't possibly, she'd said when John insisted. But if you're sure there's enough. There was exactly enough for 6 adults and 1 child. Now we were 8. I rearranged the portions with a smile, giving Lydia part of my own serving. Please, sit, I said, gesturing to the chair that should have been David's. We're happy to have you. The lie tasted like acid on my tongue. Dinner proceeded with a strange, stilted energy. Lydia positioned herself between John and Marcus, dominating the conversation with questions about John's consulting work, laughing at his stories as if they were the most fascinating things she'd ever heard. You're absolutely brilliant, she said, touching his forearm. The way you identified that market inefficiency, pure genius. Across the table, Jennifer shot me a look of barely concealed disgust. I cut my prime rib into small, precise pieces and said nothing. So how do you know Grandpa? Layla asked suddenly, her child's voice cutting through the adult conversation with startling clarity. Lydia turned to her with that practiced smile. I'm staying with the Harrisons down the street. Your grandfather has been kind enough to mentor me in my career. Oh. Layla considered this. Are you his friend? I'd like to think so, Lydia said, glancing at John. What kind of friend? Layla pressed, with the relentless logic of 7-year-olds. Layla, David said quickly, eat your potatoes. But the question hung in the air, unanswered. When dessert came, a chocolate cake I'd made from scratch, John's favorite since the day we met, Lydia insisted on helping me light the candles. In the kitchen, she touched the wine bottle she'd brought. Make sure Johnny gets a glass of this with his cake. He's been wanting to try it for months. Johnny. The nickname slid out so easily, so naturally, like she'd said it 100 times before. I struck the match to light the candles and said nothing. We carried the cake to the dining room, everyone singing, "Happy Birthday," while John beamed like a king surveying his kingdom. Layla, sitting beside me, tugged on my sleeve. "Grandma," she whispered, "that lady called Grandpa Johnny." I heard, "Sweetheart. But you don't call him that." "Nobody calls him that." Out of the mouths of babes. The song ended. John blew out the candles. Everyone applauded. And then I spoke, my voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. "Lydia," I said pleasantly, "you must be very close to my husband to know him by that name. He doesn't even let me call him Johnny anymore." The table went absolutely still. Lydia's smile froze on her face. John's eyes went wide. Our children stared, forks suspended halfway to their mouths. Lydia stammered. "It's just, we've been working together so closely, and he mentioned once that." "It's nothing," John said quickly, his laugh loud and forced in the quiet room. "Just a joke between colleagues. You know how it is." "Do I?" I asked mildly, serving cake onto plates with meticulous care. Claire coughed into her napkin. Marcus stared down at his dessert like it held the secrets of the universe. Jennifer's lips were pressed into a thin, knowing line. Only Layla seemed unbothered, happily eating her cake and humming to herself. Lydia left 20 minutes later, making excuses about an early morning meeting. John walked her to the door while I cleared plates in the kitchen, listening to their murmured conversation in the hallway. "I'm sorry," she was saying. "I didn't mean to." "It's fine," John said. "She's just sensitive lately." Sensitive. As if noticing my husband's affair made me hysterical. After the children left, after the dishes were washed and put away, after John retreated to his study claiming he had emails to answer, I stood alone in our master bathroom. The mirror reflected a woman I was learning to see differently. Silver hair still perfectly styled. Skin that glowed like polished mahogany in the soft light. Lines around my eyes that spoke of years of smiling, even when I didn't want to. Years of patience carved into grace. I touched my reflection, fingers meeting glass. For a moment, I let myself imagine what I must have looked like to Lydia, the aging wife, the obstacle to be overcome, the woman who'd outlived her usefulness. Then I smiled. The same smile I'd given John when he banished me to the guest room. The same smile I'd worn all through dinner while Lydia fawned over my husband at my own table. It was the smile of a woman who knew something her opponents didn't. "Let him think he's won," I whispered to my reflection. Because while John was busy playing king with his pretty young consultant, I was busy building the case that would cost him everything. Anthony had called that afternoon with an update. He'd found 2 more accounts, both opened in the last year, both with suspicious activity patterns. We were close to having the full picture. Soon, I'd have all the evidence I needed. And then the real performance would begin. I turned off the bathroom light and walked to the guest room, my room now, for 3 weeks and counting, and settled into the antique sewing desk where I kept my growing file of documents. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows. Inside, I added today's date to my timeline and made a note: Lydia attended a birthday dinner. Used intimate nicknames in front of family. John defended her. The evidence was piling up. And I was patient enough to let it. The guest room became my sanctuary in the weeks following John's birthday dinner. Every morning, I woke at 5:45 and performed my duties with flawless precision. Coffee brewed, breakfast prepared, his world maintained exactly as he expected it. But every night, after the dishes were done and John retreated to his study or the living room television, I climbed the stairs to my blue-walled refuge and became someone else entirely. Not his wife. His adversary. The transformation began with the closet. I cleared out the winter coats and guest linens, creating space for the filing boxes I'd ordered online and had delivered to Anthony's office. Inside those boxes, I began building my case, one document at a time. It started with the obvious things. Our deed to the house, which I discovered listed only John's name, despite my memory of us both signing the mortgage documents 40 years ago. I made 3 copies, each stored in a different location, one in my box, one with Anthony, one in a safety deposit box I'd opened at a bank across town using my maiden name. Then came the bank statements. I'd always handled our bookkeeping, but I'd never looked at it the way I was looking now, not as a partner managing household finances, but as an investigator tracking evidence of theft. Every withdrawal over $500, I photographed and documented, date, amount, stated purpose, actual purpose if I could determine it. The patterns emerged like a constellation in the night sky, clusters of spending that coincided with Lydia's presence in our lives. April 15th, $15,000 withdrawal, labeled investment opportunity. The same day the joint account with Lydia was opened. May 3rd, $3,200 charge at Tiffany's. Our anniversary was May 1st. I'd received a card and dinner at our usual restaurant. Someone else had received diamonds. June 18th, $4,500 weekend getaway to Ventana in Big Sur. John had told me it was a consulting retreat. The hotel reservation Anthony found listed 2 guests. The evidence accumulated like sediment, layer upon layer, until the picture became undeniable. Old insurance policies revealed another troubling pattern. 3 years ago, John had changed the beneficiary on his life insurance from me to estate, a subtle shift that meant the money would go through probate rather than directly to me, giving him more control over the distribution even after death. I documented everything with methodical calm, my hands steady even when my heart wanted to race. On a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after the birthday dinner, I called Anthony from the guest room while John watched a basketball game downstairs. I found something, I said without preamble. What? The house deed. My name isn't on it anymore. I know I signed those papers when we bought this place, Anthony. I remember sitting at the lawyer's office, 40 years ago, signing my name beside John's. I heard papers rustling on his end. Let me pull the county records. A pause, then, you're right. The original deed from 1985 shows both names. But there was a refinance in 2018, and the new deed only lists John Fenster. Can he do that? Without my knowledge? Not legally, no. If you were on the original deed, you'd have to sign off on being removed. Either he forged your signature, or I signed something he told me was something else, I finished. He had me sign a stack of papers that year. Said it was for estate planning, making things easier for the kids when the time came. Anthony's silence was heavy with implication. What happens, I asked carefully, if I contest these transfers? The accounts, the deed, all of it. If you can prove fraudulent transfer or forgery, the transactions can be frozen pending investigation. Everything would be locked down while the court sorts it out. Frozen, I repeated, tasting the word. Meaning he couldn't move any more money? Couldn't sell the house? Couldn't hide anything else? Exactly. But Maria, once you do that, there's no going back. He'll know you're building a case. The gloves will come off. I looked around my guest room, at the filing boxes hidden in the closet, the notebooks filled with dates and amounts, the careful documentation of 40 years of partnership being systematically erased. Good, I said quietly. Let them be frozen. I'm tired of watching him steal from me. Are you sure you're ready for that fight? Through the floor, I could hear the television announcer's excited voice as someone scored. John's triumphant shout followed, like he'd won something himself. I've been ready, I said. I just needed to know it was possible. That night, after John went to bed, I sat at the antique sewing desk in the guest room and spread out my materials like a general planning a campaign. The desk lamp cast a soft golden glow across the papers, bank statements and property records, insurance policies and credit card bills, all arranged in chronological order. My notebook lay open, my handwriting filling page after page with observations, questions, connections. April 15th, first transfer to Lydia account. Tax day, deliberately chosen? Harder to track among other financial activities? May 3rd, Tiffany's purchase. 2 days after our anniversary. Deliberate timing or coincidence? June 18th to 20th, Ventana trip. John said consulting retreat. Called hotel, confirmed two-person reservation under his name. My pen moved across the page like a weapon, each word a small act of warfare. I pulled out the financial calculator I'd found in John's study and began running numbers. If I contested the fraudulent transfers, if I could prove half of everything should have been jointly owned, if I could establish my contribution to our accumulated wealth. The numbers told a story of their own. For decades of unpaid labor, raising children, managing a household, supporting his career, caring for aging parents. If I'd been paid fair market value for even half of what I'd done, we'd be talking about millions in compensation. But I'd done it for love. For partnership. For the promise that we were building something together. He'd taken that promise and set fire to it, piece by piece, while I watched and smiled and kept his world running smoothly. Not anymore. I was deep in my calculations when I heard the footsteps on the stairs. The knock on the door was sharp and sudden, making me jump. Maria? John's voice, suspicious and alert in a way it hadn't been in weeks. What are you doing in there? My heart hammered against my ribs. I glanced at the papers spread across the desk, too many to hide quickly, too damning to explain away. Just a moment, I called, forcing my voice to stay calm. I gathered the most sensitive documents, the account statements showing Lydia's name, the deed with my name conspicuously absent, and slid them into the desk drawer, locking it with the small key I now kept on a chain around my neck, hidden beneath my nightgown. The rest I left in neat stacks, deliberately visible but carefully chosen, old photo albums, boxes of family letters, the kids' baby books. I opened the door. John stood in the hallway in his pajamas, hair mussed from sleep, eyes narrowed with suspicion. It's nearly midnight, he said. What are you doing up here? Rearranging, I said simply, gesturing to the visible materials on the desk. I couldn't sleep, so I thought I'd organize some old family photos. You know how the albums have gotten mixed up over the years. He peered past me into the room, taking in the scene. I watched his face carefully, looking for any sign that he saw through the performance. But all he saw was what he expected to see, his wife, alone in the guest room she'd been occupying for a month now, sorting through memories because she had nothing better to do with her time. You've been up here every night, he said, but the suspicion was already fading, replaced by dismissal. What's so important about old photos? They're our history, John. Our family's story. I want to make sure everything's properly documented and organized for the children. He softened slightly at the mention of the children, always his weak point. Well, don't stay up too late. You look tired. I will, I said. Good night, John. He hesitated a moment longer, then turned and walked back down the hall to the master bedroom, our bedroom, the one I hadn't slept in for 4 weeks. I closed the door softly and locked it. Then I stood very still, listening to his footsteps fade, waiting for my heartbeat to slow. When I finally returned to the desk, I pulled out the hidden documents and added a new entry to my notebook. John knocked on the door at 11:47 p.m. Questioned what I was doing. Accepted rearranging explanation without further investigation. Still doesn't see me as a threat. I smiled in the lamplight. Rearranging. If he only knew how true that was. I was rearranging everything, his finances, his secrets, his comfortable assumption that I would always be there, silent and complicit, while he built a new life with someone else. Let him think I was sorting old photos and wallowing in nostalgia. Let him underestimate me one more time. Because while he slept peacefully in our bed, I was building the case that would ensure he'd sleep alone forever. The soft lamp cast shadows across my papers, and my pen moved steadily across the page, sharp and precise as a blade. The quiet rebellion had begun. And I was just getting started. Carla Washington's office was in a small professional building on the edge of town, sandwiched between a tax accountant and a chiropractor. The sign on the door read simply, Document Services and Consultation. No mention of divorce. No indication of the quiet revolution that happened in this unremarkable space. Anthony had given me her number with reverence in his voice. She helped my colleague's mother last year. The husband was a state senator, thought he was untouchable. Carla made sure the wife got everything she deserved. Now I sat across from her, studying the woman who would help me do the same. Carla was in her late 60s, with steel-gray locks pulled back in an elegant twist and reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain around her neck. Her hands were steady as she poured tea into 2 delicate cups, Earl Grey, with a slice of lemon. "Anthony speaks highly of you," she said, settling into her chair. "He says you need help protecting yourself." "I need help understanding what I'm entitled to," I corrected. "And how to make sure I actually get it." Her smile was knowing. "Those are 2 very different things, aren't they?" For the next 2 hours, Carla taught me things I should have learned 40 years ago. She spread documents across her desk, sample divorce petitions, asset disclosure forms, temporary restraining orders designed to freeze accounts and prevent the disposal of property. "Women like us," she said, and I noted how she said to us with quiet solidarity, "we were raised to believe that knowing about money was unfeminine. Aggressive. That questioning our husbands was a sign of distrust rather than partnership." My mother told me that managing money would make John feel less of a man, I admitted. And my mother told me the same thing. Carla's expression hardened. Then my ex-husband left me with 3 children and $27 in a checking account I didn't know was about to be closed. I had to learn everything the hard way. She pushed a form across the desk. "You won't have to." The document was titled Petition for Dissolution of Marriage. Seeing it in black and white made something in my chest tighten, not with fear, but with recognition. This was real. This was happening. "In California, we have community property laws," Carla explained. "Everything acquired during the marriage is owned 50-50, regardless of whose name is on what. But," she held up a finger, "your husband has been systematically removing your name from assets and transferring community funds to accounts you don't control. That's not just unethical. It's illegal. Can I stop it?" "You can freeze it. The moment you file for divorce, we can request a temporary restraining order preventing either party from transferring, hiding, or disposing of any assets. Everything gets locked down while the court sorts out who owns what." I thought of John's face when he discovered he couldn't move another dollar. Couldn't hide anything else. Couldn't keep building his new life with Lydia while dismantling mine. "How discreetly can this be done?" I asked. Carla's smile was sharp. "As discreetly as you need. We can prepare everything in advance, all the paperwork, all the filings, all the supporting documentation. Then, when you're ready, we file it all at once. He won't know what hit him until the sheriff serves him the papers." "And my financial rights?" She pulled out another form. "We'll claim your share of everything, the house, the retirement accounts, the business value, even compensation for your unpaid domestic labor over 40 years. California courts recognize that a homemaker contributes equally to marital wealth. You weren't just playing house, as I understand he called it. You were a full economic partner, and you're entitled to half of everything you built together." For the first time in weeks, I felt something like hope. Over the next week, I became a woman I didn't recognize, methodical, strategic, quietly ruthless. Following Carla's instructions, I began making copies of everything. Not just the documents I'd already gathered, but everything I could access while John was at his weekly golf games or locked in his study on phone calls with clients. I photographed the contents of his file cabinet, page by page. I copied our joint tax returns going back 10 years. I made a video inventory of our home, narrating each item's origin and approximate value. This painting, purchased in 1998 for $8,000. This silver tea service, inherited from John's mother in 2003. This Persian rug, bought with my inheritance from my father in 2010. I went through my jewelry box and sorted pieces into 2 piles, gifts from John, which were community property, and items from my own family, which were separate property and mine to keep. I photographed each piece from multiple angles and wrote detailed provenance descriptions. Then I began quietly moving my most precious items out of the house. The diamond earrings my mother gave me on my wedding day, delivered to my daughter Claire during a lunch date, with instructions to keep them in her safe. The antique cameo that belonged to my grandmother, given to my son Marcus, to hold for safekeeping, while I had some cleaning done. The gold bracelet I'd inherited from my aunt, now residing in the safety deposit box I'd opened under my maiden name. John noticed nothing. Why would he? I'd always been in charge of organizing, cleaning, and rearranging. My movements through our home were as invisible as I'd allowed myself to become. In the kitchen, on the shelf above the refrigerator where we kept the cookbooks no one ever used, there was a book called The Art of French Cooking. It had been a wedding gift from one of John's colleagues, expensive, impressive, and completely untouched in 40 years. John couldn't cook and had no interest in learning. He'd never opened that book, not once. It was perfect. Inside the front cover, I tucked a manila envelope containing copies of everything Carla and I had prepared: the divorce petition, the asset disclosure forms, the restraining order, the evidence documentation. On the outside, in my careful handwriting, I wrote, "For my freedom." Every few days, I'd add something new: another bank statement showing suspicious transfers, another credit card bill revealing secret purchases, another piece of the puzzle that would prove John's systematic theft of our marital assets. The envelope grew thicker. My resolve grew stronger. And John remained blissfully unaware that his world was about to collapse. Late one night, sitting at my sewing desk with Carla's documents spread before me, I found myself thinking about my wedding day. I'd been 23 years old, radiant in my mother's altered wedding dress, orange blossoms woven through my hair. The church bells rang out across the neighborhood as I walked down the aisle toward John, who looked at me like I was the answer to every prayer he'd ever whispered. "I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you," he'd said, his voice breaking with emotion, his hands trembling as he slid the ring onto my finger. "To build a life with you as equals, as partners, as two people who choose each other every single day." I'd believed every word. I'd believed we were building something together, brick by brick, decision by decision, sacrifice by sacrifice. I'd believed that my work mattered as much as his. That raising our children and creating our home and supporting his career were contributions of equal value to the paychecks he brought home. I'd believed in us. The memory dissolved, replaced by the present, me, alone in a guest room, preparing to legally dismantle the marriage I'd once thought would last forever. But I wasn't that 23-year-old girl anymore, starry-eyed and trusting. I was 58 years old, and I'd learned that promises mean nothing if they're not backed by respect. That love without partnership is just performance. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. I picked up my pen and signed the divorce petition in the space Carla had marked. My signature was steady and clear. That night, before I went to bed, I did something I'd never done in the 4 weeks I'd been sleeping in the guest room. I locked the door. The old brass lock clicked into place with a sound that felt monumental, like the closing of a book or the sealing of a tomb. For a moment, I just stood there with my hand on the doorknob, feeling the weight of that small action. This room was mine now. Not a temporary exile. Not a punishment to be endured until I learned my lesson. Mine. My sanctuary. My war room. My declaration of independence. Outside the door was the life I'd lived for 40 years, the performance of perfect wife, the invisible labor, the slow erasure of self. Inside the door was everything I was becoming: strategic, protected, ready. I walked to the window and looked out at our neighborhood, peaceful in the moonlight. Somewhere 3 houses down, Lydia was probably sleeping in the Harrisons' guest room, dreaming of the life she thought she was stealing. Let her dream. Because while she was busy playing the other woman, I was busy becoming the author of my own ending. I turned away from the window and caught my reflection in the mirror above the dresser. The woman looking back at me had careful silver hair and patient eyes and 40 years of wisdom written into every line of her face. But there was something else there now, too. Power. Not the kind that shouted or demanded or made scenes. The quiet kind. The dangerous kind. The kind that planned in silence and struck with precision. I smiled at my reflection. Then I climbed into bed, the locked door between me and my old life, the hidden envelope waiting in the kitchen like a loaded gun. Tomorrow, I would wake up and make John's coffee and press his shirts and smile like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I was no longer his wife in anything but name. I was his opponent. And I was winning. The transformation happened gradually, like watching a photograph develop in a darkroom, details emerging from shadow, becoming sharper and more defined with each passing day. The guest room that had once been my exile became the nerve center of my quiet revolution. I'd installed a new filing cabinet behind the door, disguised under a cheerful tablecloth as a side table. Inside its locked drawers, manila folders labeled in my precise handwriting. Bank records. Property deeds. Insurance policies. Credit card statements. Evidence of fraud. Communication log. Each folder told part of the story. Together, they told the whole truth. On the sewing desk, hidden beneath my grandmother's quilt in the bottom drawer, was the burner phone Anthony had helped me purchase, paid for in cash, registered under a name that wasn't mine. It had exactly 4 contacts: Anthony, Carla, my daughter Claire, and a domestic violence hotline Carla had insisted I save, just in case. Not all abuse leaves bruises, she'd said when I'd protested that John had never been violent. Financial control, isolation, intimidation, those count too. I hadn't argued. The locked drawer contained something else, copies of everything I'd need to start over. Birth certificate. Social security card. Passport. Bank statements for the new account I'd opened in my maiden name, Maria Santos, not Maria Fenster. It had $3,000 in it, money I'd carefully skimmed from grocery budgets and cashback purchases over the past 6 weeks. It wasn't much. But it was mine. Every evening, after John retreated to his study or the television, I climbed the stairs to my headquarters and added another piece to the puzzle. Another document copied. Another transaction recorded. Another day closer to freedom. But something else was changing, too. Something in me. I started humming again. It surprised me the first time it happened, standing at the kitchen counter chopping vegetables for dinner, and realizing I was humming an old Motown song my mother used to play. Ain't no mountain high enough. The irony wasn't lost on me. John looked up from his newspaper, startled. You're in a good mood. It's a beautiful day, I said simply, and it was true. The October sun was streaming through the kitchen windows, turning everything golden. I haven't heard you hum in years, he said, and there was something careful in his voice. Suspicious, maybe. Or hopeful. Maybe I should do it more often, I replied, turning back to my cutting board. He went back to his newspaper, and I went back to humming, the knife moving rhythmically through the carrots. If you need me, call me, no matter where you are. The next day, when he came down for breakfast, I'd made not just his usual coffee and toast but also homemade cinnamon rolls, something I hadn't done in months. What's the occasion? He asked. No occasion. I just felt like baking. He bit into one cautiously, as if it might be poisoned, then smiled. These are delicious. You should make them more often. Maybe I will, I said. What I didn't say, I was practicing. Practicing the art of seeming content while planning my escape. Practicing the performance of a woman who'd learned her lesson and returned to her proper place. John ate it up like he ate up the cinnamon rolls, eagerly, gratefully, without question. Men like him never expect the quiet ones to be dangerous. Over the next 2 weeks, John's suspicion transformed into smug satisfaction. I'm glad you've settled down, he said one evening, watching me fold laundry in the living room. That whole incident with the guest room, I think it was good for us. Cleared the air. I agreed noncommittally, matching his socks into pairs. And I appreciate you being more understanding about the finances. A man needs to feel trusted, you know. I looked up at him, my expression serene. Of course, John. He smiled, convinced he'd won. Convinced that one night of exile and a few weeks of silence had broken me, reminded me of my place, restored the natural order of his universe. What he didn't see, the locked drawer upstairs. The envelope hidden in the cookbook. The burner phone charging in my purse. The divorce papers signed and ready, waiting only for Carla's signal to be filed. What he didn't understand, my compliance was camouflage. My humming was a war song. My cinnamon rolls were bait, keeping him comfortable and unsuspecting while I built the trap around him. He thought I'd surrendered. I'd simply gone underground. Friday afternoon, David's car pulled into the driveway. I watched from the kitchen window as Layla tumbled out, backpack bouncing, curls flying, racing toward the front door like she always did. Grandma. She crashed into my arms with the full-force enthusiasm of a 7-year-old who hadn't seen me in 3 weeks. "Hello, my darling girl," I said, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. David followed more slowly, overnight bag in hand. "Thanks for taking her for the weekend, Mom. Conference doesn't end until Sunday night." "It's always a pleasure," I said, and meant it. After David left, Layla and I settled into our ritual, cookies and milk at the kitchen table, coloring books spread between us, comfortable silence broken only by her occasional observations about school and friends and the injustice of early bedtimes. But after a while, she stopped coloring and studied me with those two observant eyes. "Grandma?" "Yes, sweetheart. You seem different." My hand paused mid-stroke, crayon hovering over paper. "Different how?" "Happier," she said matter-of-factly. "You smile more. Like you did before." "Before?" "Before what?" I wanted to ask, but I thought I knew. Before the weight of maintaining a dying marriage had pressed the joy out of me. Before I'd become so small and quiet that even a child had noticed. "I've been feeling better lately," I said carefully. "Because you're in the special room now?" I blinked. "The guest room?" She nodded. "Daddy said you sleep there now." "I like that room. It has the good light and the soft bed and all your pretty things." Out of the mouths of babes. She saw what John couldn't, that the guest room wasn't punishment. It was freedom. "Yes," I said. "I do like it there." She considered this, then leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Grandma, you look like you're planning something." My heart skipped. "What makes you say that?" "You have the same face Daddy gets when he's planning my birthday surprise. Like you know a secret and you're happy about it." I set down my crayon and looked at this perceptive child, this piece of my heart running around outside my body. "Maybe I am," I said softly. Her eyes went wide with delight. "Is it a good secret?" "I think so." "Can you tell me?" I touched her cheek gently. "Not yet. But someday, when you're older, I'll tell you all about it." She nodded solemnly, as if I'd just shared something profound. Then she went back to coloring, humming the same Motown song I'd been humming all week. I watched her for a long moment, this child who would grow up understanding that women could be soft and strong at the same time. Who would learn from my example that love shouldn't require you to disappear. That leaving could be the bravest thing you ever did. That night, after Layla was tucked into bed in the guest room with me, her small body curled against my side, her breathing deep and even, I lay awake in the darkness and took inventory. The evidence, gathered and documented. The legal paperwork, prepared and signed. The financial protections, in place. The exit strategy, ready. All I needed now was the right moment. The perfect moment. The moment when the revelation would have maximum impact and minimum room for John to maneuver. Anthony had found everything we needed. The full extent of the transfers to Lydia. The forged signatures on property documents. The credit cards I'd never authorized. Even, and this had been the final nail, evidence that John had been reporting lower income on our joint tax returns while hiding additional consulting revenue in accounts I didn't know about. That last piece was significant. Tax fraud was federal. It meant John's problems would extend far beyond our divorce. "We have enough," Anthony had told me during our last meeting. "More than enough. When you're ready, we file everything at once. Divorce petition, asset freeze, fraud report to the IRS, the whole package." How long will I have? I'd asked. Once we file, he'll be served within 72 hours. The restraining order freezing the accounts will be in effect immediately. He won't be able to move a dollar. I smiled. Good. Now, lying in the darkness with my granddaughter sleeping beside me, I ran through the mental checklist one more time. Everything I needed to leave him. Everything I needed to protect myself legally. Everything I needed to expose his lies. Everything I needed to start over. The plan was complete. All that remained was execution. Sunday morning, after David picked up Layla and the house was quiet again, I returned to the guest room. John was playing golf, his Sunday ritual. I had 3 hours. I stood in the doorway and looked at what I'd created, the filing cabinet disguised as furniture, the locked drawers containing my future, the desk where I'd planned my escape. This room had been meant to shame me. To punish me. To remind me of my place. Instead, it had liberated me. I walked to the door and ran my fingers over the brass lock, the lock I'd been using every night for 6 weeks now, claiming my space, protecting my sanctuary. Then I did something new. I locked it from the inside, in the middle of the day, sealing myself in with my secrets and my strength and my certainty. This was my room. My headquarters. My declaration of independence. And soon, it would be the launching pad for my new life. I sat at the sewing desk and pulled out my journal, the one where I'd been documenting everything, creating a narrative of these weeks of transformation. On a fresh page, I wrote. Today, I am ready. The plan is complete. The evidence is gathered. The legal protections are in place. All that remains is choosing the moment to strike. John thinks he's won. He thinks I've been tamed, reminded of my role, put back in my proper place. He has no idea that every smile I've given him has been a countdown. Every hummed song, a battle hymn. Every cinnamon roll, the last meal before war. I am no longer his wife. I am his reckoning. I closed the journal and locked it in the drawer with everything else I'd hidden. Then I unlocked the door and went downstairs to start dinner. When John came home from golf, sunburned and pleased with his score, he found me in the kitchen making his favorite pot roast. Something smells amazing, he said, kissing my cheek. I thought we'd have a nice dinner, I said. Just the two of us. What's the occasion? I smiled. Do I need an occasion to cook for my husband? He laughed, delighted, and disappeared into his study to shower. And I continued preparing dinner, humming softly, the knife moving through vegetables with practiced precision. Soon, I thought. Very soon. I chose the first Sunday in November for the same reason generals choose dawn for their attacks, the element of surprise, when the enemy is comfortable and unprepared. Let's have everyone over for Sunday dinner, I'd suggested to John 3 days earlier, my voice light and casual over morning coffee. It's been weeks since we've all been together. That's a wonderful idea, he'd said, pleased. See? I told you the guest room thing would be good for us. You're yourself again. Myself. If he only knew which self I'd become. I'd called each of our children personally. Just a family dinner. Nothing fancy. I miss seeing everyone together. Marcus had sounded surprised but pleased. Claire had asked if everything was okay, too perceptive, that one. David had simply said he'd be there with Layla. I didn't invite Lydia. But I knew she'd come anyway. By 4 o'clock Sunday afternoon, the house smelled like rosemary and garlic. I'd prepared a feast, roasted leg of lamb, scalloped potatoes, green beans with almonds, fresh rolls from the bakery downtown. The dining room table was set with our wedding china, the crystal glasses catching the late afternoon light. It looked like a celebration. In a way, it was. The family arrived promptly at 5. Marcus and Jennifer first, bringing wine. Claire and Tom with homemade apple pie. David and Layla last, the little girl racing to hug me while her father carried in a bouquet of fall flowers. Grandma, you look pretty, Layla said, and I did. I'd worn the emerald dress John had told me not to wear, the one that made my skin glow. My hair was styled differently, softer. My makeup more dramatic than usual. I looked like a woman preparing for battle. John held court in the living room, pouring drinks, telling stories about his golf game, basking in the role of patriarch. Our children laughed at his jokes and asked about his latest consulting projects, and everything was warm and normal and perfect. Until the doorbell rang at 5:30. I was in the kitchen basting the lamb when I heard John's voice at the door, followed by that familiar high laugh. I hope I'm not intruding. Through the doorway, I watched Lydia sweep into our home like she belonged there, wearing a wine-colored dress that hugged every curve, carrying an expensive bottle of champagne. "Lydia," John said, and I caught the flash of panic in his eyes before he covered it with forced enthusiasm. "What a surprise." "I ran into Patricia Harrison at the market," she said smoothly, touching his arm with practiced familiarity. "She mentioned you were having a family dinner, and I thought I'd drop off this champagne as a thank you for all your mentoring. But I don't want to interrupt." "Nonsense," I called from the kitchen, walking into the living room with a serene smile. "We're happy to have you join us, Lydia. I'll just set another place." Our children exchanged glances. They remembered her from John's birthday dinner. They remembered the nickname. They remembered the tension. Claire's eyes met mine across the room, a silent question. "What are you doing, Mom?" I gave her the smallest nod. "Trust me." Somehow, Lydia ended up seated between John and Marcus, dominating the conversation with questions about John's brilliant insights and invaluable guidance. I sat at the opposite end of the table, serving food, pouring wine, playing the perfect hostess while watching everything with crystalline clarity. Layla, seated beside me, tugged on my sleeve. "Grandma, why is that lady here again?" "Good question, sweetheart," I murmured. The meal proceeded with uncomfortable politeness. Jennifer made strained small talk about her garden. Tom asked safe questions about Marcus's promotion. David tried valiantly to steer conversation toward Layla's upcoming school play. But the real conversation was happening in glances and silences. In the way Lydia's hand lingered on John's arm. In the way John's laugh was too loud, too forced. In the way our children watched their father with growing suspicion and their mother with growing concern. Finally, dessert was cleared. Coffee was poured. And John stood, raising his wine glass with a satisfied smile. "I'd like to make a toast," he announced, commanding the room the way he always did. "To 40 years of partnership." He looked down the table at me, his expression magnanimous, as if he were graciously forgiving me for some minor transgression. "And to fresh starts." The words hung in the air. Fresh starts. I thought of the joint account with Lydia. The secret credit cards. The forged signatures. The systematic erasure of my name from our assets. The life he was building with another woman while pretending to honor our marriage. Fresh starts. I stood slowly, raising my own glass. "Fresh starts," I repeated, my voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. "Funny thing about fresh starts, John." I paused, letting the moment stretch. "They require an ending first." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. John's smile faltered. "Maria." I reached beside my chair where I'd placed a thick manila envelope before dinner, the one I'd been building for 8 weeks, the one containing 40 years of partnership reduced to evidence of fraud. I placed it on the table in front of John's plate with a soft thud. "What is this?" he asked, his voice tight. "Open it." His hands shook slightly as he pulled out the contents. I'd organized them carefully, deliberately, for maximum impact. On top, divorce papers, signed by me, ready for filing. Beneath that, bank statements highlighting every transfer to the joint account with Lydia Carr, $26,000, documented and dated. Then, credit card bills showing hotel rooms, jewelry purchases, weekend getaways, all the purchases he'd hidden from me. Then, property documents showing how my name had been removed from our house deed through what appeared to be a forged signature. And finally, a letter from Anthony, in his capacity as a financial consultant, outlining evidence of unreported income and potential tax fraud, with copies already forwarded to the IRS. John's face went from pink to white to gray as he flipped through the pages. Our children leaned forward, trying to see. Jennifer gasped. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. Marcus's jaw clenched. David reached for Layla, covering her ears even though she was already absorbed in her coloring book. And Lydia went very still, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. Maria, John said hoarsely. You can't, we need to talk about this privately. No, I said calmly. We're well past private conversations, John. You made sure of that when you opened joint accounts with our neighbor's niece and transferred our retirement savings into them. Lydia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I should go. Sit down, Lydia, I said, and something in my voice made her freeze. You're part of this story. You might as well hear how it ends. She looked at John desperately. He looked at the papers, then at our children, then back at me. You can't do this to me, he whispered. The words were so familiar, the same words he'd used when I questioned him about the money, when I dared to assert myself, when I refused to be invisible anymore. You can't do this to me. As if my life was something that happened to him. I walked slowly around the table until I stood beside his chair, looking down at this man I'd loved for 40 years. This man who'd promised to be my partner and had instead made me his servant. This man who'd stolen from me while I slept in the room next door. I'm not doing this to you, John, I said softly. I'm doing this for me. Lydia bolted for the door, grabbing her purse and fleeing without another word. We heard her car start, tires squealing as she peeled out of our driveway. John stared at the papers, his hands trembling. Our children sat frozen, coffee cooling in their cups, dessert untouched. Finally, Marcus spoke. Dad? Is this true? John's mouth opened and closed. It's complicated. Is it true? Marcus repeated, his voice hard. Some of it is, there are explanations. Did you steal from Mom? Claire asked, her voice breaking. Did you forge her signature? I didn't steal, it's our money, I was just managing it. In a secret account with another woman? David's voice was ice. That's management? John looked at me, his eyes pleading. Maria, please. Don't do this. Think about the children. Think about our family. I am thinking about our family, I said. I'm thinking about our daughter, who needs to see that women don't have to accept financial abuse. I'm thinking about our sons, who need to understand that partnership means equality, not control. I'm thinking about our granddaughter, I glanced at Layla, still coloring peacefully, who deserves to grow up knowing that leaving is sometimes the bravest thing you can do. I picked up my wine glass and raised it one more time. To endings, I said. And to the fresh starts that come after. I drank, set down the glass, and walked out of the dining room. Behind me, I heard John's chair scrape back, heard him start to follow. Don't, Marcus said sharply. Let her go, Dad. I climbed the stairs to the guest room, my room, and locked the door behind me. From downstairs, I could hear raised voices. Questions. Anger. The sound of John trying to explain the inexplicable, justify the unjustifiable. I sat at my sewing desk and pulled out my phone, the burner, not my regular one. I texted Carla, it's done. File everything tomorrow morning. Her response came immediately, proud of you. Papers will be served by Tuesday. I texted Anthony, thank you. For everything. You did this yourself, Aunt Maria. I just helped you see what was already there. I set down the phone and looked around my headquarters, at the filing cabinet, the locked drawers, the evidence of 8 weeks of quiet rebellion. The war wasn't over. There would be legal battles, financial negotiations, probably ugliness I couldn't yet imagine. But the hardest part was done. I'd spoken my truth. And I'd chosen myself. Outside my door, I heard footsteps. A soft knock. Mom? Claire's voice. Can I come in? I unlocked the door. She stood there with tears streaming down her face, and without a word, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. I'm so proud of you, she whispered. And finally, after 8 weeks of strategic calm, I let myself cry. Not from sadness. From relief. The divorce papers were served on Tuesday morning at 9:47 a.m. I know because John called my phone, the regular one, not the burner, exactly 3 minutes later. I let it ring. Then ring again. And again. By noon, he'd left 14 voicemails. I deleted them without listening. Claire stayed with me those first few days, sleeping in the guest room while I moved my things to her old childhood bedroom down the hall. She'd taken the week off from work, appearing at the door Monday evening with 2 suitcases and a fierce expression. You're not doing this alone, she'd said. We spent those days in careful routine, morning coffee, afternoon walks, quiet dinners. She didn't ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. She just stayed close, a buffer between me and the chaos I'd unleashed. From her I learned the details of John's unraveling, pieced together from Marcus's phone calls and Jennifer's carefully worded texts. It happened faster than I'd imagined. Monday afternoon, while the process server was driving to our house with the divorce petition, John tried to call Lydia. The number was disconnected. He drove to the Harrison house. Marcus told me this part later, having heard it from Patricia Harrison herself at the grocery store. Is Lydia here? John had demanded at their door, disheveled and desperate. Lydia? Patricia had looked confused. She moved out Sunday night. Said there was a family emergency. Left in such a hurry she forgot half her things. A family emergency. The same night as our dinner. The same night she'd seen the evidence spread across our dining room table. John had called her workplace Next, the consulting firm she'd mentioned so often. According to Marcus, who'd done some investigating of his own, there was no employee by that name. There never had been. The marketing connections, the business expertise, the career she'd been building with John's, mentoring, all of it, fiction. Lydia Carr had vanished like smoke, taking $26,000 of our money with her. And John had no way to get it back without admitting why he'd given it to her in the first place. Tuesday afternoon, per the court's temporary restraining order, every account was frozen. John couldn't access the savings. Couldn't move the investments. Couldn't use the credit cards that were in both our names. Couldn't even sell the car without my signature. He called me 16 times that day. I blocked his number. Wednesday morning, he showed up at the house. Claire answered the door while I watched from the upstairs window. She doesn't want to see you, I heard her say, her voice carrying that particular tone of disgust only a disappointed daughter can muster. This is my house. Actually, according to the restraining order, you can't be here without her permission. And she's not giving it. Leave, Dad, before I call the police. He left. But not before I saw his face, pale and drawn, 10 years older than he'd looked a week ago. I felt nothing. By Thursday, the IRS had opened an investigation into the unreported income Anthony had discovered. By Friday, John's consulting clients had started calling, asking questions about the audit, distancing themselves from potential legal trouble. His reputation, built over 40 years of careful networking and strategic relationships, crumbled in less than a week. Marcus called Saturday morning. Mom, Dad's asking if you'll meet with him. Just to talk. No. He says he can explain everything. There's nothing to explain, Marcus. The evidence speaks for itself. A long pause. I know. I had to ask. He's falling apart. Good, I said quietly. After we hung up, Claire looked at me with concern. You okay? I'm better than okay, I said. And I meant it. Monday morning, 11 days after the papers were served, Carla called. Your husband is at my office, she said. Asking to speak with you. Tell him no. I did. He's quite persistent. Says he'll wait. Then let him wait. I hung up and went about my day, meeting with the realtor about apartments near the coast, having lunch with my sister Carol who I hadn't seen in months, shopping for new clothes that made me feel like myself again. At 4 p.m., Carla called again. He's still here. Still no. He's saying he'll agree to whatever you want if you'll just talk to him. Tell him, I said carefully, that if he agreed to what I wanted, we wouldn't be getting divorced. Tell him I'll see him in court. I heard her smile through the phone. With pleasure. That night, alone in Claire's guest bedroom, she'd insisted I stay with her until the legal proceedings were further along. I lay awake remembering John's hand on my back at a party, steering me away from a conversation about investments. You don't understand these things, Maria. Let the men talk business. The time I'd wanted to go back to school, finish my degree. What's the point? You don't need to work. I make plenty for both of us. Finding out he'd bought a new car without consulting me. It's my money. I don't need permission. The way he'd started introducing me, this is my wife Maria. She keeps the home fires burning. As if that was all I was. All I'd ever be. The gradual erasure, my name removed from accounts, my opinions dismissed, my dreams postponed and then forgotten. The guest room. The final insult. The exile that became my liberation. I let the memories wash over me like a baptism, cleansing away any remaining doubt about my decision. But there were other memories too, newer ones, building day by day. Sitting in Carla's office, signing papers that gave me back my power. Anthony showing me the accounting that proved I was entitled to half of everything, and possibly more, given the fraud. Standing on the deck of a small beach cottage I'd rented for the weekend, watching the Pacific crash against the rocks, tasting salt air and possibility. Looking in the mirror and seeing not John's wife, but Maria Santos, the woman I'd been before I became Mrs. Fenster, and the woman I was becoming now. One afternoon, 2 weeks after the papers were served, I drove to the coast alone. The cottage was tiny, just one bedroom, a kitchen with windows facing the ocean, a deck where I could drink my morning coffee and listen to the waves. It was nothing like the sprawling house I'd maintained for 40 years. It was perfect. I stood on that deck, wrapped in a sweater against the November wind, and felt something unfurl in my chest. Freedom. Not the kind that comes from running away, but the kind that comes from running toward something better. Toward myself. My phone buzzed. A text from the realtor, the owners accepted your offer. The cottage is yours. I smiled at the ocean, tears streaming down my face. Mine. Not ours. Not his. Mine. That evening, I stood in the cottage bathroom, small and simple, nothing like the master bath I'd left behind, and studied my reflection. The woman looking back at me had silver hair that was growing out of the style John preferred, curling naturally at the ends. Had eyes that looked lighter somehow, less burdened. Had a smile that came easier now. I wasn't his wife anymore. I was my own woman. And that was more than enough. I thought about John then, probably sitting in the big house that felt empty now, calling my number that remained blocked, trying to figure out how he'd lost control of the narrative. He'd thought he was so clever. Moving money. Hiding assets. Building a new life with a younger woman while keeping me locked in place with guilt and financial dependence. He'd underestimated the quiet ones. We're the most dangerous kind. Because while everyone's watching the loud ones make scenes and demands, we're in the shadows gathering evidence, building cases, planning exits so thorough that by the time anyone notices we're leaving, we're already gone. I whispered to my reflection, "You did it." And she whispered back, "We're just getting started." My regular phone rang, the one I'd stopped blocking now that the legal protections were in place. It was Marcus. "Mom? Dad's in the hospital." My heart didn't skip. "What happened?" "Panic attack. They're keeping him overnight for observation. He's asking for you." I looked at my reflection one more time, at this woman who'd found her spine after 40 years of bending. Tell him, I said gently, that I hope he feels better. And that my lawyer will be in touch. Mom. I'm not cruel, Marcus. I don't wish him harm. But I'm also not his wife anymore, not in any way that matters. He made choices. Now he lives with them. Silence on the other end. Then, okay. I understand. I love you, I said. I love you too, Mom. And I'm proud of you. After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the deck watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of copper and gold. Somewhere, John was in a hospital bed, finally facing consequences. Somewhere, Lydia was counting money that wasn't hers. Somewhere, our children were processing the truth about their parents' marriage. But here, on this deck, in this cottage that was mine alone, I was at peace. The downfall wasn't mine. It was his. 6 months later. The cottage living room held 12 women on Thursday evening, seated in a circle of mismatched chairs I'd collected from thrift stores and estate sales. Afternoon light streamed through the windows, turning the ocean beyond into liquid gold. My husband told me I was too old to start over, said Patricia, a woman of 72 with steel gray hair and hands that trembled slightly when she spoke. That no one would hire me. That I'd end up alone and destitute. And what happened? I asked gently. Her chin lifted. I got my real estate license last month. Sold my first house last week. The circle erupted in applause. Patricia's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. This was the guest room club, named for the rooms we'd been exiled to, punished in, forgotten in. The rooms that became our sanctuaries. Our headquarters. Our launching pads into new lives. We met every Thursday at 5 p.m. Women over 50 who'd been told they were too old, too dependent, too far gone to reclaim their independence. Women who'd been financially controlled, emotionally diminished, systematically erased from their own lives. Women who decided to rewrite their endings. I stood to refill the tea, and caught my reflection in the mirror above the sideboard. The woman looking back wore a navy dress, the same one I'd worn to that final dinner 6 months ago, the one where I'd served John his reckoning on our wedding china. But it looked different now. Or maybe I looked different in it. My hair was shorter, natural curls framing my face instead of the careful waves John had preferred. My skin glowed with the kind of radiance that comes from ocean air and peaceful sleep. No expensive creams, no strategic makeup to hide exhaustion. Just me, at 58, finally comfortable in my own skin. You're beautiful, said Carmen, one of our newer members, watching me. You have this lightness about you. Freedom looks good on her, added Diane, who'd been coming since our second meeting. Doesn't it, ladies? A chorus of agreement. I smiled, pouring tea into delicate cups, my grandmother's china, the set I'd retrieved from storage after the divorce was finalized. Things that were mine, that had always been mine, no longer hidden away to protect them from a marriage that had already broken. It looks good on all of us, I said. After the meeting ended and the women had filtered out into the golden evening, hugging goodbye and promising to see each other next week, I found an envelope that had been slipped under my door. No return address. Postmarked from Seattle. Inside, a single page in handwriting I recognized from the casserole notes and the cheerful birthday cards she'd brought to John. Dear Maria. I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect forgiveness or even acknowledgement. But I needed to write it anyway. You were right about him. About all of it. He promised me the same things he probably promised you 40 years ago: partnership, adventure, a life built together. He made me feel seen, special, chosen. By the time I realized I was just another woman he was using, I'd already taken money that wasn't mine and destroyed a marriage that wasn't mine to destroy. The money's gone. I spent it trying to build the life he promised we'd have. When the investigation started, I ran. I'm not proud of that either. I see women like you sometimes, women my mother's age, with silver in their hair and strength in their eyes, and I wonder if I'll ever have what you have. That dignity. That certainty. You could have destroyed me. You had every right to. Instead, you let me disappear, and I'm grateful. I hope someday I learn to forgive myself the way you forgave yourself. I read it twice, then walked to the deck and let the ocean wind take the pages from my hands, watched them spiral away into the evening sky. Forgiveness. Such a complicated word. I didn't forgive John. Forgiveness implied he'd asked for it, earned it, deserved it. He'd done none of those things. But I'd released him. Released the anger, the betrayal, the years of diminishment. Not for his sake, but for mine. And Lydia? She was young and foolish and complicit. But she was also a symptom, not the disease. The disease was a man who'd stopped seeing his wife as a partner and started seeing her as property. Who'd thought love meant ownership instead of equality. I hoped she learned. I hoped she became someone better. But her journey wasn't mine to walk. Saturday morning, David's car pulled into my driveway. Layla tumbled out, taller than she'd been 6 months ago, her curls caught back in a bright yellow headband. Grandma. She raced across the deck and into my arms. Hello, my darling girl. David followed more slowly, carrying a backpack. Thanks for taking her for the weekend. I've got that conference in San Diego. It's always a pleasure, I said, and meant it more than ever. After David left, Layla and I walked on the beach, collecting shells and sea glass, our feet bare in the cold sand. I like your house, Grandma, she said, examining a perfect sand dollar. It's cozy. I like it too. Do you miss the big house? Not even a little bit. She considered this with the seriousness only a 7-year-old can muster. Do you miss Grandpa? I stopped walking and looked out at the ocean, letting the question settle. Did I miss him? Not the man he'd become, controlling, dismissive, cruel in small ways that accumulated like interest on a debt I never agreed to pay. But sometimes, late at night, I'd remember dancing in the kitchen while dinner burned. Remember the way he used to leave love notes in my purse. Remember believing we were building something beautiful together. I missed that version of him. The one who'd existed, or the one I'd believed existed, before the slow erosion of respect had worn away everything good between us. But I didn't miss the reality. Not for a second. I knelt beside Layla, eye level with this perceptive child who would grow up understanding things I'd had to learn the hard way. No, sweetheart, I said softly. I miss who he used to be, or who I thought he was. But I love who I became without him. She nodded solemnly. You smile more now. I do. And you hum all the time. I do that too. And you have the beach. She gestured at the endless Pacific stretching before us. Yes, I said, pulling her close. I have the beach. And so much more. My independence. My peace. My self-respect. My future, unwritten and gloriously mine to determine. That night, after Layla was asleep in the guest room, my guest room now, in my house, decorated with her drawings and smelling of strawberry shampoo, I sat at the small desk by the window and opened my journal. The same journal I'd kept through those 8 weeks of quiet rebellion. The same pages that had documented every transfer, every lie, every step of my transformation from victim to victor. I turned to a fresh page and wrote. After 40 years of marriage, he told me to sleep in the guest room. He thought it was punishment. Exile. A way to remind me of my place. He was wrong. That guest room became my sanctuary. My headquarters. The place where I stopped being his wife and started being myself again. In that room, I gathered evidence. I built my case. I planned my escape. In that room, I learned that the quietest rebellion is often the most devastating. In that room, I became dangerous. So I did sleep in the guest room. I slept there for 8 weeks while I documented his theft, his lies, his systematic erasure of my contributions to our life together. And when I was ready, I told him to sleep alone forever. Not with anger. Not with drama. With paperwork and evidence and the quiet certainty of a woman who'd finally remembered her worth. 6 months later, I live in a cottage by the sea. I run a support group for women reclaiming their lives. I sleep peacefully every night, no longer listening for footsteps in the hallway or preparing for the next small cruelty. The divorce was finalized last month. I got the beach house, half our assets, and compensation for the money he transferred to Lydia. He got the big house with all its memories, his tarnished reputation, and the IRS investigation that may take years to resolve. Our children visit me here. They bring their children. We build sandcastles and cook meals together and talk about things that matter. John lives alone in that big house, exactly as I told him he would. And I am free. Free from the weight of maintaining a marriage that had died years before I acknowledged it. Free from the performance of being someone I never wanted to be. Free from the man who loved control more than he ever loved me. After 40 years of marriage, he told me to sleep in the guest room. So I did. Then I told him to sleep alone forever. And I've never slept better. I closed the journal and looked out at the ocean, dark now except for the silver trail of moonlight across the water. Somewhere in that big house, John was probably awake too. Probably thinking about what he'd lost. Probably wondering how it all fell apart so quickly. But that was his story to write now. Mine was just beginning. I turned off the light and walked to the guest room, where Layla slept peacefully, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. I kissed her forehead gently, breathing in the sweetness of childhood innocence. "You're going to grow up strong," I whispered. "Because you'll know that women can be soft and fierce at the same time. That leaving takes more courage than staying. That love without respect is just pretty packaging on an empty box." I returned to my bedroom, my sanctuary now, and climbed into bed. Through the open window, I could hear the ocean's eternal rhythm, constant and soothing. Tomorrow, the guest room club would meet again. More women would tell their stories. More courage would be found in collective witnessing. Tomorrow, I'd walk on the beach with Layla and teach her to find beauty in broken shells. Tomorrow, I'd continue writing the chapters of my life that only I got to author. But tonight, I would sleep peacefully in my own home, in my own bed, in my own skin. After 40 years of marriage, he'd told me to sleep in the guest room. And that guest room had set me free.